You can feel it ending. You've felt it for months, maybe years. The version of them you fell in love with shows up less and less, replaced by someone colder, more distant, increasingly cruel in ways so subtle you can't even name them out loud without sounding dramatic. And yet you stay, not because it's getting better, not because you're hopeful, but because leaving would require admitting that the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years were spent waiting for someone who was never going to choose you the way you chose them. And that admission feels more unbearable than one more year of this. Here's the truth. No one says out loud. You aren't staying because of love. You're staying because your brain has been rewired to associate suffering with connection. And that rewiring didn't happen by accident. It was methodical, neurological, and devastatingly effective. This isn't about strength or weakness. It's about how the brain becomes addicted to unpredictability and mistakes that addiction for connection. If you've ever stayed far longer than you should have, if you found yourself defending someone who treats you badly, explaining away behavior that everyone else can see is destructive, waiting for the person they used to be to come back, there's a reason. And it's not because you love too much. It's because your nervous system has been chemically hijacked by a pattern that gambling addicts would recognize immediately. Psychologist B.F. Skinner documented this in the 1950s with what he called intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful conditioning mechanism known to behavioral science. An animal or person who receives a reward every time they perform an action will lose interest quickly when the reward stops. But an animal or person who receives the reward unpredictably, sometimes yes, sometimes no, no pattern, no way to predict it, will keep performing that action compulsively, long after the reward has stopped coming entirely. Not because they're stupid, because the brain's dopamine system is wired to chase uncertainty. And here's what nobody tells you. That's exactly the architecture of relationships that slowly destroy you. The good days aren't consistent enough to rely on, but they're frequent enough to keep you hoping. The partner who's cold for 2 weeks and then suddenly affectionate for 2 days isn't being inconsistent. They're operating a slot machine. And your brain is the gambler pulling the lever, convinced that the next pull is when everything pays out, that the person you fell for will come back, that this time, if you just get it right, the warmth will stay. But the warmth never stays, because it was never about what you did or didn't do. It's about a dynamic that requires the instability to function. The second trap is what economists call the sunk cost fallacy, the psychological refusal to abandon something you've already invested heavily in, even when continuing costs you more than walking away ever would. You've put in 5 years, 10 years. You've weathered the bad times, made sacrifices, turned down opportunities because of this relationship. And leaving now feels like admitting all of that was wasted. So you stay. Not because the present is good, not because the future looks promising, but because the past feels too heavy to let go of. This is what therapists sometimes call loss aversion in relational contexts. The brain's hardwired preference to avoid loss over acquiring gain. Leaving a bad relationship feels like losing all those years. Staying feels like protecting an investment. But here's the thing. The years are already gone. You can't get them back by staying. You can only lose more. And the cruelest part, every additional month you stay increases the psychological cost of leaving, which makes you more likely to stay longer, which increases the cost further. It's not a relationship at that point. It's a debt you're trying to pay off by going deeper into debt. And the person you're with isn't your partner. They're the bank. Now here's the part that'll mess with you. The reason you can't leave isn't just about dopamine or sunk costs. It's about something darker, trauma bonding. the biochemical attachment that forms when someone alternates between being the source of your pain and the source of your relief. When the person who hurts you is also the person who comforts you after, the nervous system stops distinguishing between the two. The brain starts to associate them together. Pain plus relief equals connection. And over time, you can't feel the relief without the pain. You can't access the warmth unless there's been coldness first. This is the architecture of abuse. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind where no one hits anyone. No one screams. But somehow, over years, you've been trained to accept treatment you wouldn't tolerate from a stranger. And the worst part? It feels like love. Because your nervous system is releasing oxytocin when they finally soften. Bonding chemicals. The same ones released during genuine intimacy. Except this time, they're being triggered by relief that you survived another round of emotional starvation. And here's what changes everything. After years of this, healthy relationships don't feel right. They feel flat, boring. The absence of chaos reads as the absence of passion, because your brain was conditioned in an environment where love was high stakes, unpredictable, always on the verge of being withdrawn. So when someone shows up who's consistent, emotionally available, safe, the nervous system doesn't recognize it as connection. It registers it as nothing, as emotional death. This is what psychologists call emotional decompression terror, the fear that emerges when the constant cortisol spikes stop and the body has to adjust to baseline calm. After years of adrenaline and volatility, peace doesn't feel like safety. It feels like abandonment, like you're not being paid attention to, like the relationship doesn't matter anymore. Not because anything is actually wrong, but because your brain learned to measure love by how much it hurts. There's a version of this that sounds like love. Then one day, the same feeling comes back, and it just sounds like exhaustion. Not the dramatic kind, the kind that's been running so long in the background you stop noticing it was there. Until someone asks if you're happy, and you realize you can't remember the last time you checked. Because leaving doesn't just mean losing the person. It means losing the hope. The story you've been telling yourself about what this was supposed to become. And for some people, that hope is the only thing holding the structure together. Without it, they'd have to face how much time they spent waiting for someone to choose them who never actually did. But here's what changes the pattern. Recognizing that staying isn't love. It's fear. Fear of the silence. Fear of starting over. Fear that no one else will want you. Fear that leaving proves you failed. And the moment you realize those fears are running the decision, not care, not commitment, not love, the spell breaks. Not immediately, but eventually. If you've ever felt trapped in a relationship where leaving feels impossible but staying feels unbearable, you're not weak. You're wired. Wired by a nervous system that learned to call suffering connection. And the first step out isn't dramatic. It's just recognizing the pattern, naming it, seeing it for what it is. If this video felt like a mirror you've been trying to avoid for years, subscribe. Leave a comment with the word enough if you know exactly what I mean. There's a lot more underneath this one.